Respected Principal Dr. Sunil Khosla, BB Punjab University Constituent College Balachor, esteemed academia, dear students, it's an honor to have been invited to participate in this colloquium as a keynote speaker. It has been a tradition in Indian culture to exaggerate the accomplishments of the keynote speaker, and that humbles me all the more. I think I must say that the honorable principal, has been very, very kind to me in his introduction. Now, coming to the topic straight away, I have been called here because, not because I am an academician. I am on a much lesser footing as compared to an academician in terms of knowledge and the research on the subject. I believe I've been called here basically because of the experience that I have in certain fields, which can be shared formally, informally, and some sort of an information which generally is in public domain or in response to your questions and observations. I can divulge certain difficulties, certain information, or certain facts which generally don't appear in the public domain. The topic of the day is the ease of living and the citizen-centric governance. Now, the Constitution says it's the government of the people, by the people, for the people. But our colonial past always casts its shadow on our mindsets. It's not without reason that people on the side of the government, on the management side, are more often than usual criticized, and rightly so, for two reasons. One, a positive reason that in a developing country and in an evolving society, there's always a gap between the aspiration of the people and the delivery quantum and standards of a government. On the negative side, the criticism is basically because whatever is possible is not delivered. The speed of delivery is compromised, the quality of delivery is compromised, and there's a very legitimate criticism for that. That is why we have the opposition. That is an institution in parliamentary democracy. But at the grassroots level, at the middle management, and at the apex bureaucratic levels, even that answerability is not there. So the concept of answerability is substituted by a concept of accountability. But what is citizen-centric administration? It's unfortunate that many of us on the government side do not trust the citizen at all. That's why we used to have, and still have to a large extent, an affidavit regime. That I will believe a citizen, I will believe in what a citizen is saying only if he submits a statement on oath, duly certified either by a notary public or even by a magistrate. Without that, I am not going to trust him. This has been our past. The system of excessive cross checks was based on distrust of a foreign ruler on the Indian citizens. Therefore, every citizen had to prove himself. With every government procedure, there had to be an affidavit attached. It could be even with a caste certificate, economically backward certificate, domicile certificate, even admissions. You have to take a driving license, you have to give an affidavit, you have to get a ration card, you have to give an affidavit. Every state was earning, say, about 50 crores of rupees only by selling affidavit papers, stamp papers. But on the other hand, forget about this income. On the other hand, what were the citizens undergoing? Was this a citizen-centric decision to indulge in all this, to have this type of a system in place? No. So a realization came 3-4 years back, or maybe 5 years back, and out of about more than 100 places where an affidavit was required, except where it was a statutory requirement, it was substituted by self-certification. And heavens have not fallen. Anyone who would tell a lie on oath will tell a lie on plain paper also. And there are so many remedies for tackling these things. Now, then again there was a concept that the citizen, ordinary citizen, doesn't know much. And the state is a feudal giver. And the citizen is a helpless. That feeling led to a planning process starting from the top and percolating down to the bottom. People on the government side felt that they are the best repositories of knowledge about what a citizen is facing, and there was hardly any need for grassroots level planning, dialogue, surveys and collection of opinion. There was no need for setting up certain indices to understand what is complicating the citizens' lives, and so on. And that's why bridges were made where there were no rivers. The rivers had dried and the bridges were made. Perhaps railway lines were also laid where there was no traffic. Public utilities were provided where there was no access, and so on. I'm just giving you an example. Now, citizen-centric, first of all, we have to understand, for giving a citizen-centric governance, what is the problem that a citizen faces. Some people say e-governance is the answer. E-governance is, according to me, just a tool of better governance. If the core governance is compromised and deficient, the e-governance can hardly reshape it. If the departments are not working at the back end, the e-governance has a limited role in doing it, in improving the outcomes. In e-governance, there are two parts, as you know. One is 100% automation and online delivery of services. The other is people who are not yet digitally accomplished. They have to be provided unified service delivery centers where they can go and someone is there to assist them to fill up the forms and get the services in a prescribed period of time. The biggest problem that a citizen used to face was avoidable contact of a citizen with the lowest level of government functionaries. Now, of course, e-governance can eliminate that by providing services online. and setting up unified service delivery centers like we had set up Seva Kendras in Punjab, which started seeing footfall of almost 50,000 per day, working all 6 days, 6 out of 7 days of a week, and only 2 holidays in a year. That's it. They are still functioning, though due to some financial constraints, their number has been reduced temporarily from about 2,000 to 500 something. But this concept has clicked, and it is saving millions and millions of man hours and harassment. Now, in the absence of effective MIS, when technology was not employed, there was no accountability, there was no monitoring of the complaint redressal, and the citizen was at a loss. It was, and still is, to a large extent, where citizen-centric governance is not effective still. It was an era of missing files, misplaced files. Suvidha fee for, making the file move from one table to another. No age analysis of the pending references. So in no way the governance was citizen-centric. It was, I would say, official-centric. It was bureaucratic in its negative sense. The hierarchy of decision-making used to kill the citizen, and generations were lost following up the cases pending for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. This is to an extent still there in the government as also in the judiciary. It's still taking 15 years, 20 years, 25 years for a judicial matter to attain a finality. So, to that extent, we can say that it's not citizen-centric at all. It was an age of, and still to a large extent it is, out-of-turn syndrome. Hire agents, bribe people, give illegitimate fee, facilitation and bribes, then get your things done out of turn. There was no electronic queue management systems. Now the question is, how complicated is the life of a citizen? We can broadly, if we feel as a citizen, feel as more of an unprivileged and underprivileged citizen, which none of us in the audience is today. There are two types of issues which complicate his life. One is the basic survival issue: food, housing, health, and so on, employment. These are basic survival issues. If they are not tackled, the life cannot be decomplicated, whatever frills we may provide the person. The second is the second category. A person has employment, a person has reasonable housing, a person has some adequate or inadequate health facilities also. Then he needs pure air, pure water, he needs electricity, he needs someone to take away his solid waste disposal, and so many other things. Someone has to pay the bills. If there is no online or digital intervention in the payment of bills, just imagine the amount of time we might have to spend in banks, electricity board, railway ticketing, airline ticketing, water bill payments, and even seeking admissions, fixing appointments with doctors, health institutions, this, that. Now, these are the complications. Then there are system-generated complications. Imagine what is the procedure for getting a marriage certificate. It took us a team of 16 persons to simplify application forms, just about 100 in number. It took us 1 year. The government forms are devised in such a complicated manner, and they are full of such irrelevant information that they ask, that it is most user unfriendly. Setting the procedures short, starting to trust the citizen, simplifying the forms, then finally prescribing timelines for service delivery. In the absence of all this, what is the fate of the citizens? Hundreds of thousands of people from villages, from one town to another, just get up in the morning, go to government offices, go to courts, do nothing productive and come back home unsuccessful. This is certainly not citizen-centric thing. A question can conveniently be asked to us that now you are sermonizing, what all have you been doing throughout your life? I explained that right in the beginning, that there is a gap between aspirations and needs and the capacity of the governments to deliver. Financial constraints, human resource constraints, and motivational constraints, and efficiency constraints, and commitment constraints. They're there. But if the intent is clear, there's this famous example of a tree, an old dry tree set on fire, and a bird carrying a drop of water in its beak. Multiple visits in its urge to extinguish the fire. And someone asked the bird that, what are you up to? In 30 rounds you will drop 30 drops of water on a burning tree. The bird replied that, I know one bird cannot do it, but when history is written and a long list of people is prepared who contributed to extinguish that fire, my name also will be written there, because I also contributed for the right cause. So that's the answer which normally almost everyone asks, that what do you do? In that connection, a very good step was, as I mentioned earlier, the state services portal for integrated delivery of online services. The state started with 10, some state with 20, some state with 40, some progressive state with gradually more and more services are being included for online delivery, because it's not a simple process. Online delivery is only possible if the entire backend is digitized. Suppose someone needs a birth certificate online. All the birth details of the last 100 years lying in different offices of the civil surgeons have to be digitized. And then software has to be prepared to retrieve the information. Then there has to be an auto certification. Suppose the process of digitization is incomplete, the records are incomplete and misplaced, then online is impossible. And there are vested interests to defeat the online initiatives, because online delivery of service is one fundamental way of reducing or eliminating corruption. Now, this is one process which is going on all over the country, all over the world. The advanced countries have this in place in a much better way. They are ahead of us. They have digitally enabled population also, and very digitally enabled governments also. They can give digitizing outsourced projects, crores and billions of dollars. They can do everything. In a developing country, the money is less, the needs are more, and you spend most of time in distribution of scarce resources to various demand points. So obviously we are behind others, but we are ahead of many also. The second thing is the Seva Kendras, the unified service delivery centers. We started with one service, now there are, I think, 500 services. There are departments which are not digitized even now, but the front end is digitized. Persons go there, sit in air-conditioned environment. There's an electronic queue system. People there take their applications, scan them, or photocopy them. If there is a digital communication between the front end and the back end department, the papers go digitally. If there is no digitization, personal courier service has been engaged. So like a postman going, all the applications, bunch of papers are taken, a receipt is given to the applicant, and they are made to reach the back-end department like agriculture department or director health or director food or DFSE or someone. then the time is prescribed under the Right to Service Act, which I'll explain later. The applicant gets SMS notifications, and when the papers come back, a notification goes to him, he comes back and collects it from the Seva Kendra. He pays facilitation charges which are official, written on the blackboard outside, and if there are statutory fees, they are also collected there and transferred to the government exchequer there and then. There was a Seva Kendra every 10,000 to 15,000 population in Punjab. That means every 2 or 3 villages put together there was one Seva Kendra. It had a lot of advantages. And within 1 year, the total footfall increased more than 50,000 per day. It saved a lot of manpower. It saved a lot of man hours. It improved the quality of life of the people at far ends. In the urban areas, there were bigger Seva Kendras, 15 counters, 20 counters, more than one, like in the city of Ludhiana, Jalandhar and all, more than one. As the services will go online, the pressure on the unified delivery centers like Seva Kendras will reduce. But like railway tickets are available online also, and the railway tickets are available on the platforms also, we'll have to maintain some duality till the entire country is ready for online. Another very important citizen-centric effort that has been made in the recent past is the Sanj Kendras of the police. I don't know whether you have heard about them or not, but that's a nationally acclaimed model now. See, everyone, because of historical reasons or psychological reasons, is afraid of going into the police station. Even our lawmakers understand this. That is why it has been provided that women cannot be called to the police station after sunset, and if some investigation has to be carried out with regard to women, it should be a priority to do the investigation at her residence. Everyone is scared because there are all types of criminals available there. You might be going in only to report that your cycle has been stolen, but there could be someone accused of a rape or a murder or another heinous crime there, and some company which you may not like. So therefore, the functions of a police station were in a way divided. The police station was left for core policing, like investigation of crime and cognizable offences, serious offences. Now, the police doesn't only do that. For ordinary citizen who's not a criminal himself, or unfortunately a victim, who's not a victim, then the core policing is irrelevant for him. But he has so many other things to do where the police becomes very relevant, and for which earlier he had to go into the police station, like all verifications, passport verification, antecedents verification, verifications for issue of an arm license, extensions of arms license, stamping of the passports of certain categories of NRIs, then verifications when someone gets an employment, then again character verification, and hundreds of other verifications. Now, all these things have been brought out of the police station into very modern infrastructure, counters, non-uniformed, sophisticated people handling those counters, completely digitized. Small things like mobile misplacements, telephone lost, and wallet stolen, or other non-cognizable offense for which only a DDR is required, not an FIR. Then the grievances redressal unit, a very minor crime, someone has abused someone has slapped someone, casual. Then verifications and permissions, NRI counter, traffic management and info, then legal aid. Someone doesn't know what to do. This has happened. Someone has stolen 4 buffaloes of someone. What to do? So people even need the services to write an application. There's a counter for that. Then victim relief. I'll when I explain further this concept, it will be clearer how this unit can do the victim relief work and alternate dispute resolution and social and political conflict prevention. The management of the Sanj Kendra is not official, it is citizen centric. There is an official side, there are 4-5 people from the police, including the SHO, the DSP, or at the district level, the SSP. But at the same time, there are 5 or 6 non-official members, Sarpanch or municipal president, then 2 or 3 women members, then educationists of the area, some technocrat of the area, some lawyer who can pro bono spend some time. They are a part of that management structure and they are supposed to hold regular community meetings. It's a community policing approach. So there's a lot of footfall there. There is absolutely no inhibition for the people going there. It's becoming a popular concept nationally, though different states are giving different names to it. So this is how, now it's not always essential for small disputes to be settled as per law by the SHO and the police. So at the Sanj Center itself, there is a panel of people who can intervene for an alternate dispute redressal. And the one party comes and complains, the second party is issued a notice, and all of them appear before that person who is empaneled for alternate dispute resolution. Now coming to the ease of living. Now this was only the delivery of services and governance. Now what we do now is, or what is expected of the government now, to evaluate its functioning. How do we evaluate that the governance is contributing to the ease of living of the citizen? How do we evaluate that delivery of services is increasing the ease of living? So there are some indices. Percentage of services, citizen services, available online. Percentage of services integrated for delivery. Percentage of citizens using online services. They'll use only when we provide it. Then what is the average delay in grievances redressal? Now the softwares are available. From 18 months delay, we could bring down the delay, average delay, to 1 month and 8 days. The softwares are so good now. If someone has the commitment to provide citizen-centric services, if a license renewal application is pending for 35 days in the subdivisional office of Balachor with some Asharani license clerk 2, we can find out. And when we used to have a video conference every week with the deputy commissioners, we could point out that what's wrong with that Balachar office. Why is it that 18 applications for license renewal are pending for more than 2 months? So the pendency suddenly started having a free fall. The figures came down substantially, unbelievably. So this is an index. Then the tax collected as percentage of tax billed. It could be GST, it could be municipal tax and all. See, we always say we are short of money. And everyone knows there are 2 ways of going bankrupt. And the there's a third one also, which leads to suicide. The first is you don't earn adequately, in the sense that, number one, your tax net is not sufficiently wide. And second, there are so many leakage points in the tax collection stream. That is the part one, which reduces your income. And the second is if you spend much more than your income on unproductive things. It may be personal, it may be in government also. Now we'll have to prioritize after the COVID jolt. We'll have to prioritize now differently. Do we need memorials, or do we need ICU beds? Do we need non-productive expenditure here, there, everywhere, or expenditure on health, expenditure on education, and expenditure on social security? Then another index is to what extent and with what percentage are we collecting the operation and maintenance cost of our essential services like water supply, sewage management, disposal of solid waste, and all. The state can, of course, provide the basic infrastructure, the capital cost. What will happen if, even after the cross subsidization, there's a huge deficit in what is being spent on operation and maintenance, for example, of drinking water supply in the cities, as compared to what we earn? It will never be a good delivery. The citizens will suffer because the operation and maintenance will get compromised. There's nothing free in this world. So this is also an index. Then the participation. What percentage of area and population is covered by the area committees, the ward committees, and so on and so forth. These are the governance indices that have been chalked out. Now, basically, for discussing ease of living or for providing ease of living, we have to focus on 4 pillars basically. One is institutional, which is governance, which we have already discussed. The second is economic. If we take care of the economy and employment issues, yes, then there is ease of living. Everyone needs to earn his food, earn his housing, earn his wherewithal to live a happy life. That is only through employment of any type. And that is ease of living index point. Then most of the points are of economic nature, social nature. Do we have transportation and mobility? I'm emphasizing on public transport and mobility. We all are from Punjab or anywhere in the country. There are very, very few cities where local public transport has been successful. A citizen who doesn't have his own scooter, own cycle, own car, cannot move around. Now, what a contrast from the developing world. There are again reasons for that. Most of the cities started and the pricing structure was such that it became unviable. Then it was started without citizen-centric planning. The points of origin, the stops, the destinations were not the ones which the citizens wanted. They were all products of air-conditioned office planning. And then there's this concept that some people feel that you can make the lives of people easy by giving them free things. If you do not fix the fare, even to collect the cost of the usage of tire and diesel and normal depreciation of the vehicle and price and salary of the driver, how will that service sustain in the long run? So it's for making a citizen-centric administration or governmental policies. Yes, government has the primary responsibility, but the citizens also have a secondary responsibility to give it a foundational support with lots of sincerity and the urge to make it a success. Then power supply. What percentage of people have uninterrupted, metered, smart metered power supply? That's a continuous effort, because without power supply, I don't think there can be any ease of living. Assured water supply, solid waste management. Lot has been done in the solid waste management effort in the cities, starting from providing the dustbins, which disappear, then appointing service providers who would collect, who will transport it to the disposal plant, and then trying to convert them into fuel breaks or something for ensuring their reuse. But it is a partial success, but not a total success, because the fundamental thing is that we want everything subsidized and free, whereas it should be cross-subsidized. People who can afford to pay can pay a bit more. People who cannot pay cannot be left out. They have to be cross-subsidized. But if the O&M is not recovered, they will never be sustainable. And although citizens also have a point, sometimes citizens are made to pay for the inefficiencies of the organizations who provide drinking water or electricity. The citizens are made to pay for the leakages and the theft of electricity. It's unfortunate. But that will be eliminated if there is metering of power supply at the generation point, every transmission point, and the ultimate consumption point. But in our agriculture sector, there is no metering. So there is a possibility of transferring some of the transmission losses to the citizens' account. Then we have to see whether we have sufficient number of open public spaces. When we plan our cities, we have to see the housing and inclusiveness. Then a citizen can never be comfortable in his life if there is pollution, air pollution, water pollution, even noise pollution. This COVID syndrome is recent. During the stubble burning season, Delhiites had started wearing masks for the last 3 years. Though I don't believe that it is only because of stubble burning. They have their own vehicular traffic and other issues. They burn their municipal solid waste also. There are mountains of municipal solid waste all around Delhi. Their rivers are full of froth. One day, perhaps like a lake in Bangalore, their rivers will also start burning because of the chemical quantities in it. But we have to give our citizens a pollution-free environment as far as possible. For that, to the extent possible, we'll have to provide thousands of crores of agricultural infrastructure to our farmers so that there is wherewithal with them for an alternate disposal of the stubble. So these are the things, some of the things which are essential to make these the citizens comfortable. Then we have to think from the side of the citizens, take their views, have a dialogue with them, and try to understand what way they want to preserve their identity, what way they want to preserve their culture. Then what way do we have to handle their educational needs? Basic denominator of educational quality has to be maintained. There is a vast gap between what we should be doing in educational sector and what is actually done. And for that, perhaps our generation will have to apologize to the coming generations. The educational infrastructure is deficient. The educational manpower is deficient in number. The sanctioned posts are lying vacant for one reason or the other. The comprehension level of the students in the schools is compromised, and the employability of the graduates that we produce is highly compromised. The misfortune is that where we have avenues of employment, our youth doesn't have employability, and where they have the employability, we don't have the avenues. So that's also complicating the citizen's life, and we'll have to address that. For citizen-centric governance, we need to understand, calculate, plan, and provide for the hospital beds, the trauma centers, ICU centers with oxygen support. What is now this ambulance service is a step forward. This is a citizen-centric measure, but we don't have sufficient number of trauma centers to handle basically the accident deaths. There is one accident death, road accident death in India every 4 minutes. Every 4 minutes. Other accidents are also there. I'm talking only of the road accidents. Then safety and security. The citizens have to be safe and secure, and that's possible if there is a certain number of CCTVs per every kilometer of road, busy areas, public places, which is a huge expenditure. And there has to be a back-end control room to handle all this. Then, what percentage of economically weaker section citizens and what percentage of slum-dwelling citizens have been provided reliable, affordable housing? If we don't do that, then we are only talking of the upper elite and the middle classes, and not the vast majority of people who are either below the poverty line or marginally above the poverty line. That's a very, very critical area. Now, our per capita supply of water, that needs to be increased. Equitable distribution of water availability is more important than even the per capita availability. In our washrooms, we have 6 taps, if we count. And there are slums and dwellings of economically weaker sections where 250 households have one public tap. We'll have to seriously engage ourselves in recharging our water resources. An effort has been made. Notifications have been issued. In fresh construction, in plots above a certain area, this recharging facility has been made a mandatory requirement. It's not that the government is oblivious to all this. Without taking much time, I would just read out the Government of India schemes which are oriented towards providing an easy living, the ease of living to the citizens. Power for all, Hriday's Heritage City Development, Smart Cities Mission, Swachh Bharat Mission, National Water Mission, Digital India, National Health Mission, Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana for skilling, Housing for All, Atal Innovation Mission, Pilgrimage Rejuvenation and Spiritual Augmentation Drive, Prime Minister Jan Dhan Yojana, Startup India, Atal Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation, Make in India. These are working schemes, but the only thing is they have to deliver. Deliver not only efficiently and qualitatively, but also speedily, because it's a losing race. Expectations are increasing, needs are increasing, population is increasing, and if we lag behind, there's always a void which brings a lot of criticism, genuine criticism, legitimate criticism against us. I would just take another 5 minutes. Actually, the colloquium started very late because so far we haven't spoken specifically about 75% of the people of India who live in rural areas. Most of the things applied to rural areas also, like power, like delivery of services, like water, etc. But there are certain issues. Rural areas don't have production centers. That is the basic root cause for migration of workers. Though it has been happening historically, and labor mobility is always there as one of the fundamentals of economics. But still, if there are regional production centers, like they have organized it in China and many other countries, perhaps the length of the migration and the rigor of the migration will be lesser. For the rural masses, for their ease of living, the first and the foremost thing that has been done, and it's still continuing, is the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee, Manrega, which is popularly called. I don't need to explain it. It has given lot of relief, lot of comfort, and lot of strength and self-confidence to the rural people. This measure has brought down the exploitation of poverty in India, because people are now substantially self-reliant. They create infrastructure. It's running in 693 districts. There are more than 12 crores active workers at present. And just in the three or 4 months of this year, almost 55 crores person days have been generated under it. That means people are taking advantage of this. It's the biggest guarantee against starvation. Then there is Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, particularly for women, giving them cooking equipment, gas, cylinders, making their life really easy, much easier than before. Because we have seen the days when chulas used to be burnt and the whole house was full of smoke, and we have seen incessantly cuffing mothers and grandmothers in the villages. Then Deen Dayal Upadhyay Antodaya Yojana is there. That is National Rural Livelihood Mission. Everyone knows about it. Then the Indira Gandhi Old Age Pension is now there in a modified manner as the National Social Assistance Program. The senior citizens, the widows, all they are getting monthly pensions, and with this Jan Dhan connectivity, now it's directly going into their accounts. India doesn't have that type of social security which developed countries have. This is not adequate social security. We can say it is just subsistence, it's token. Whenever the government is in a position to part with greater amount of funds, it can be increased. But a connection, a social security connection has been established. Similarly, there's this mission Antoday and all. Now, before I conclude, I had mentioned that ease of living cannot solely be carried out by e-governance. It's basic governance which has to be improved through technology and e-governance, and then it's a mutually supporting march. Good governance promotes e-governance and e-governance promotes good governance. Instead of going to the patwaris for taking fards or getting certifications about your properties, now most of the states have their property management systems for panchayats and municipal bodies. They have their fard kendras, where sitting home or even sitting in California, you can get the copy of Jama Bandi of your land situated in Balachor. It needs to be refined further. Still, all these facilities have not been integrated into one app. There are countries where there are ministries of happiness. They constantly keep on thinking how to decomplicate the lives of the citizens, for which a lot of back-end effort is also required, besides having a very amicable front end. Now, e-office barcoding has been introduced. Then software computerized location of files has been introduced. That concept of missing files is gradually dying. It's coming to an end. That evil is coming to an end. We all vote. Just understand how comfortable now voting process is. You get your electoral roll on your screen. If you want to find about your vote number and all, you just have to fill up your name and the constituency and father's name. It's available. Then you vote. The voting process is so simple, and then the counting process is so simple that in 3 hours the results are there. The democratic processes have been decomplicated for the benefit of the citizen. Now, the income tax. Earlier there used to be personal biases in investigations. Now all your returns go to a central server and you don't know where they go. Maybe a return filed from Balachor will land up in Calcutta, and a return filed from Ropar will land up in Chennai. The person who is scrutinizing it will not know you, and you will not know the person who is scrutinizing. And then the assessment will be made. The refunds come online into your accounts. Just imagine, had there been no e-governance, how could we have managed these credit cards, debit cards, and electronic fund transfers and tele-mobile? We are moving ahead, but of course the gap is also increasing because the aspirations are very high. All that we have to do is, from the government side, we have to work very hard in a very committed manner. Maybe for next 1 generation or 2 generations, I don't know. It will all depend upon the commitment of the people. It will depend upon their capacity to generate funds. It will depend on their appropriate prioritization of public expenditure. It will also depend on the enlightenment that the citizenry will generally have to support such moves. The citizen's life and the success of citizens centric administration lies on these factors. With these words, I take leave. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to interact with you. Thank you very much.